Hello, everyone. This is Ray Sammy from Jennifer Schaus and Associates. Welcome to the 2018 edition of Webinar Wednesdays, brought to you live from Washington, D.C., and hosted by Jennifer Schaus and Associates. Our topics cover all things related to U.S. federal government contracts. Thanks for joining us today. Our panelists are industry experts and include consultants, attorneys, accountants, and other professionals who work in the federal contracting sector. Our webinars are complimentary and are held every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. They're all recorded and can be viewed on our YouTube channel or directly on our website under the webinar tab. In the interest of time, we will not be taking questions, so please send any questions directly to our speaker, and her information is available on our last slide. All right, a little bit about us. We're a Washington, D.C.-based consulting firm serving both product and service companies worldwide. Services range from market analysis reports to contract vehicles and contract administration. We can help you with GSA schedules, proposal writing, ADA certification, and more. We host events throughout the year, including training classes, so please visit our website or sign up for a complimentary newsletter in order to stay current. Today, we are fortunate enough to be joined by Anna Ehrman of the Virginia PTAP, or the Procurement Technical Assistance Program. Anna will be discussing understanding and capitalizing on small business set-aside. You can see some of Anna's background on this page. Thanks for joining us today, Anna. Let's dig into understanding and capitalizing on small business set-aside.
Thank you, Ray. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. So we've got a little bit of time to cover a topic that I'll certainly give you a grounding on, but there is so much information out there. So we'll get you oriented, I'll show you some resources, and hopefully you'll be able to go from there. And as Ray said, my information and contact is at the end of the presentation. So let's jump right in. Ray, next slide, please. Just by way of background, the reason that set-asides exist is Congress realized back in the 1950s that there was significant government interest, not just in buying products and services to keep government agencies running, but also in promoting and buying from small businesses. So the government mission isn't just to get the best price, but also to buy from small businesses, to buy from businesses owned by disadvantaged persons, as well as several other considerations that every contract comes with, otherwise known as unfunded mandates. In the case of small business, the goal that exists, and it was established in the 1990s procurement reforms, is 23%. So that means 23% of total contract dollars must be spent with the small business community. So that only includes prime contract dollars. In addition to that 23%, the prime contracts that are awarded to non-small businesses or to companies that are other than small businesses may also have separate subcontracting goals as well, and those vary contract to contract. But for the purposes of today's discussion, we'll just focus on the prime dollars awarded to in competitive contracts. 23% of that must go to small business. Initially, that was a goal with no teeth, and the way it worked was that government identified that, yes, we want to work with small businesses. Here's a competition. We want to buy a building. We want to invest in an IT infrastructure. We want our lawn mowed, whatever that is. And let's compete it. And if a small business wins, great for that small business, great for our goals. But there was no instrument to ensure that certain contracts, a certain amount of dollars, went to small businesses. And if you put on a full and open competition, especially for larger procurements, the chance of a small business being able to win against a large prime was pretty small. So the government goals were not being met, small businesses were unhappy. The solution to that was the setup framework of set-aside contracts. And set-aside is as an instrument means that a contracting office could set a procurement aside so that only certain companies could compete for it. So if you look on the right side, the bars of the chart, the way that set-aside is set up is that a federal agency could set aside work for small businesses, but also for women-owned businesses, 8A businesses, hub zone businesses, and service disabled veteran-owned businesses. That means if the program is in that set aside, if a procurement is in that set aside, that only companies that meet the criteria and applied for and received that certification can bid and win the work. The government's guaranteed to get its goal met if they do their math right. A certain percentage of dollars are allocated to that. If enough companies compete and win, then we meet our goal. And the small businesses and the disadvantaged businesses are better off because they're competing against companies that are similarly situated. So only companies that are also owned by service disabled veterans, or only companies that are also in hub zones or owned by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals. So in the last several years, in the last 4 years, federal agencies have mostly met their small business goals. The area where they struggle the most is in the hub zone set aside part, and we'll talk about why when we discuss the individual set asides. So let's do that right now. Next slide, please. So I will walk you through the definitions and the applications for each of the set-aside programs. Most of them are administered by the U.S. Small Business Administration, except for the veteran-owned one, and we'll talk about that one at the end. So the first set-aside is small business. How do you qualify for that? You have to be a small business in your industry. There is no single definition for what a small business is in federal contracting. The way that the Small Business Administration determines whether or not a company is small is by comparing it to the sizes of its competitors or the industry averages. If you look at the SBA website, or actually you could Google SBA NAICS size tables, you will see that each NAICS code or each industry classification code has its own definition of what is small. Just by a rough guideline, the products companies, so companies that manufacture items, will their size will be determined by the number of employees that they have, and the companies that provide services, their size is determined by the average of 3 years of the company's annual revenue. The way that it's reported is each company has to register in SAM.gov and update their record in SAM.gov every year. As the registration is done or updated, you put in the number of employees that your company has and the total annual revenue of the company, and on the back end, SAM.gov looks at your primary NAICS, looks at your size, employee number, and determines whether or not you're a small business. There's nothing additional you need to fill out. There are no forms. You are either small or not. And if you are small, you could state that on your business card, in your marketing, etc. The next category is the 8A. 8A set aside, and actually all of the set asides that we'll talk about, so all of the ones except for small, they have to be owned, the majority of them have to be owned by a U.S. citizen or citizens. So for the 8A purpose, you have to be 51% or more of the company has to be owned, managed, and controlled by a U.S. citizen who is socially and economically disadvantaged. The social disadvantage means that the person claiming the disadvantage has to prove that there has been some kind of discrimination in the United States in employment, business, or educational opportunities. There are some ethnic and racial minorities that are presumed to have a disadvantage, but you will be required to write an affidavit or an essay explaining how you were disadvantaged in your particular career or education. It's all based on personal story. You could submit third-party affidavits or witness accounts as well. For example, if there was a physical disability that caused you to get passed over for a promotion, or if you were raised in abject poverty and didn't have access to electricity until you were 18 and out of the house. So it's minorities, but also other categories or other disadvantages than minorities. The economic disadvantage, and please look at the certification when you're going to actually submit because the numbers do change. But for economically disadvantaged as of right now, the person applying for certification has to be earning less than $250,000 a year, has to have less than $250,000 in current net worth, and less than $4 million in total assets. Now, the current net worth, the $250,000 in net worth, does not include your primary residence, and it does not include your equity or your value in the business that's applying for certification. Your total assets will include the home and the business. Other considerations for 8A is the company is it's not written anymore. It used to be written, but it's no longer. There's a strong preference that the company is in business for 2 or more years and that has a diversified revenue base. The reason those two are pretty strongly recommended or required by SBA is because the 8A program is only applicable to a company for 9 years. After that 9 years, the company can never apply for 8A again, and you, the individual that's eligible, can never apply for 8A again, even if you start a company in a whole other industry. So you're providing 8A services, you're providing IT services, and you were an 8A company, and then you decide to go into poultry farming, you can't get an 8A even with your poultry farm. So because of the one bite at the apple, one chance, what the SBA wants to see are companies that are positioned to grow. It's very difficult getting a company that just formed and hasn't done anything in private or commercial or government contracts to get them from virtually zero to a viable company by the time that your graduation date approaches, and you just don't have the opportunity to take full advantage of the 8A program. So that's why the 2 years is strongly recommended. They will make exceptions, but don't count on it. And most of the time, when we talk to companies in the 8A program, one thing they say is, we wish we listened to you and we would have waited until our infrastructure is in place more, until we have a better story, until we build our relationship. So then we hit the ground running once we have the 8A status and we're ready to utilize it and apply it from the outset. The diversified revenue base is, again, for the same purpose. The SBA wants no more than 70% of your total revenue coming from one source. Because if one contract goes away, you have nothing to support your company on. It would be very difficult for you to continue building the kind of long-term relationships and the kind of sales cycle it takes to sustain your federal business. The next certification is HUBZone. HUBZone stands for Historically Underutilized Business Zone. And it is a program to not just help small businesses, but to help geographic areas that are more depressed compared to their surrounding areas. So a hub zone is an area that has a higher unemployment rate or lower per capita income base than its surrounding geography. The way that the hub zone program is enforced or is applied is, in order for a company to be eligible, it has to have a principal place of business in a hub zone, and at least 35% of the company's employees have to live in hub zones. It doesn't have to be the same hub zone for your principal place of business and your employees, as long as independently they both satisfy the hub zone requirement. The reason that the program is administered in such a way is that if we recognize that certain geographic areas need the help and need the infusion of jobs and revenue, then we'll make sure that the money is going to those areas and the residents of those areas by making sure that the residents get the jobs. And the principal place of business, which means the place where most of the company's employees report to work, is actually in a hub zone. Now, principal place of business doesn't mean your headquarters. So you could have a fancy, expensive downtown office that's small and just to meet with clients, but you could have a call center or a warehouse, or just an office somewhere that's in a hub zone, as long as most of your employees or the plurality of your employees work or are assigned to that hub zone office. If your employees are off-site or on a client site or on a job site, that doesn't count for you or against you. So if you're on a client site, it doesn't matter if that's in a hub zone or not. But let's say I have 15 people working on a construction site somewhere, and their HR records are in my HubZone office, and their supervisor is in the HubZone office. And whenever there's a health or safety briefing or a staff meeting or something, they go to the HubZone office. That's kind of the determination that is made. The HubZone certification is ongoing, so as long as you're eligible, you could reapply every 3 years for the duration that your company is small and you meet the HubZone eligibility criteria. The biggest challenge with HubZone is the staff turnover. And the reason that federal agencies have a more difficult time meeting that goal is because the HubZone contractors have a harder time complying with the HR, the 35% component. It's difficult to maintain, especially as a company is growing, because you have to keep that ratio up of the 35% of your people have to be in hub zones. One interesting note, though, is that in order to qualify as an employee for hub zone purposes, the person has to work for your company and be compensated, but they only have to work for your company for 40 hours a month. So part-time people, 10 hours a week times 4 weeks is 40 hours a month. Part-time people count. Paid interns count. Independent contractors, 1099s, do not count. And the only unpaid people that count are the ones that have a financial stake in the game. So if you as an owner choose not to pay yourself because there's not enough profit margin yet, that's okay. If you live in a hub zone, you would count as 35%. Now, if you don't live in a hub zone, you count against the other 65. 65. You have to do my math right. The other challenge with hub zone is that if a company falls out of eligibility at any certain time, let's say you had 3 people and 2 of them are in a hub zone and 1 is not, and one of those people, one of your hub zone people quit, you are no longer in compliance. Now, you could keep your current contract unless you were doing something shady. You don't lose those, but you are not able to bid on any other contract until you bring your company back up to compliance with HubZone. So it's an ongoing, substantial investment of your HR resources to pursue the HubZone certification. There are pretty good resources on HubZone, actually on all of them from the SBA website. And HubZone program does have a live call-in, I think once or twice a week, where it's just an open phone line for an hour where you could call and ask them any question about it, and the analysts are pretty good. So take advantage of that. The next 2 I'll talk about together, the women-owned small business and the economically disadvantaged women-owned small business. The one difference is that the economically disadvantaged women-owned small business have to meet the economic disadvantage criteria, which are similar to the 8A but slightly higher. Actually, maybe not slightly higher. The economic disadvantage means less than $350,000 salary, less than $750,000 in current assets or current net worth, excluding your home and excluding the business that's applying, and less than $6 million in total assets. Both women-owned small business and economically disadvantaged women-owned small business have to be owned. Majority of the business has to be owned by U.S. citizen and by women. The difference in the application for women-owned small business or economically disadvantaged women-owned small business, in the ED process, you get asked the questions about the economic status of the company. Otherwise, they are the same. And if you are ED WOSB certified, you are also WOSB certified. The ED is a subcomponent of the women-owned small business. two ways you could certify for the program. One is by going online to certify.sba.gov and complete the online questionnaire and submit the documents electronically, and you are presumed to be self-certified. The other way to do it is by going through one of the four third-party certifiers recognized by the SBA. It's not a federal mandate or requirement that you do so. It is an option. It's something that was enacted in the NDAA for, I think it was as a transition. There is some movement, or there has been some movement, to move entirely away from self-certification towards a certification process where somebody is reviewing the application and checking the eligibility. For the 8A program and the HubZone program, it's done by the Small Business Administration. For the Women-Owned Small Business program, there is no government office to do that. So third-party certifiers are one mechanism to do so. However, that is not free. That comes at a cost, and it's a business decision for the company. The language of the authorizing legislation changed so that self-certification was taken out of the language. Presumably, that means that some kind of certification is required, but the SBA has not updated its regulations to mandate either third-party certification or to mandate some kind of a government-run process to do it. So right now, you could do either, but that may change when SBA gets around to updating its regulations and either staffing and funding an office to be on par with the 8A or HubZone, or to require all applicants to go through the third-party private registration process. You may get asked by your large prime partners or by some other industry partners to be third-party certified, and it may just be their way of shifting liability. They don't want to take your word for it that you didn't lie to the government or that you submitted all the documents properly. It may be a safety measure for them to say, well, go to this third party who could review your records and give us a neutral kind of seal of approval that you are who you say you are. There's nothing that's preventing them from doing that. There's nothing on the government's end requiring them. But in your business decision, you may find that your partners are looking for that or asking for that. So you decide at that point. The last certification that we'll talk about is the veteran-owned and the service-disabled veteran-owned. There's, again, two ways to certify. For most federal agencies, the only thing that companies are required to do right now is to, in the SAM.gov application, when you are registering your business as a federal contractor, you check the box for veteran-owned or service-disabled veteran-owned business, and that's all that's required. However, for the Veterans Administration, for the Department of Veterans Affairs, and for the Federal Aviation Administration. Now, FAA is funded through your airline fees, not through congressional appropriations, so they decide what they want to do. There are some other agencies that are not funded through congressional appropriations, and they don't have to follow the federal acquisition regulations. So you'll see that their rules differ. However, FAA is the one so far that's adopted this process. So to get certified by the Department of Veterans Affairs, you have to go through CVE. It's an office within the Department of Veterans Affairs, and it is free. It's an application process where they will ensure that the business is owned, managed, and controlled by a U.S. citizen who is a veteran or service-disabled veteran. They will not ask for your service records. They will get those electronically from the back end once you submit your electronic signature form with all of your personal information. They will ask for pretty extensive proof of business ownership, stock certificates, articles of organization, any leases or contracts or things like that. There is no expectation that to get registered through CVE that the company has to be in business for any length of time or or have revenue of any amount, a new business can register for the VOSB or SDVOSB. You just have to um, answer the questions to the best of your ability. And in the application where it asks for things that you don't have, like, for example, copies of 20 canceled checks, you just have to provide a letter of explanation that's quite simple and just says, letter of explanation, we don't have 20 canceled checks because the account was opened last month. Here's a voided copy of our first check or something like that. As long as you don't leave any document areas blank, because then you won't be able to complete the application. So that's kind of the overview of all the certifications. One question we get quite a bit is, can I apply for more than one? Yes, as long as you are not playing musical chairs. So if, let's say, you're owned by one person who is um, a socially and economically disadvantaged individual who is a woman and also a service disabled veteran, then you're eligible to apply for the 8A, the women-owned, the economically disadvantaged women-owned business, and the service disabled veteran-owned business. You could apply for all three. What you cannot do is say, we have two owners, two of them are women, one of them is a veteran and is not disadvantaged, and another one is not a veteran but is disadvantaged. So we're going to apply for all three. Because in each sense, the majority of the company has to be owned by one or more eligible individuals. You have to pick which two are going to be the 51% or more and stick that out through the duration of your company. The way that you pick which two, if everybody contributes pretty much equally, one is to look internally. Who are going to be the two individuals that are really in control and are giving up their day jobs first and are the most instrumental to a company? If all things are equal, then you pick which ones do the agency customers care about? Which goals do they have the most difficult time meeting? Or conversely, which goals are the agencies that we're bidding with are always looking to meet and exceed? So if you're working with the VA, then obviously the service disabled veteran one will be most important. So look at what the customers care about. So I think that's, do I have another slide? I think that was the end, right? Okay. So just to leave you with a couple of final thoughts, the status itself seems like the search or the kind of the primary occupation of what many small businesses are doing. Your status should never be the lead. It shouldn't be the first thing that you talk about. It's a supporting document. It's a buttress to what you're saying. It's a, by the way, we could help you meet the goal. But a government agency is not going to buy from you because you're small or because you're women-owned. They're buying because they have a congressionally mandated need, they have a mission, and they have a certain budget. If you can meet their mission needs and come in under budget, and by the way, also help them check a box for women-owned or service disabled or whatever set aside, then that helps. But don't assume that you're the only small business or the only member of whatever socioeconomic class that they meet. Look to prove that you are excellent at whatever it is that they're trying to buy, and use it wisely. So just to leave you with a next step or a resource, I represent the Virginia Procurement Technical Assistance Program. However, there's 98 of people just like myself around the country. We are all funded by the Department of Defense, Defense Logistics Agency, and a local college, university, or local government. And we provide counseling and training and to help government contractors be better at government contracting. So we partner with organizations like Jennifer Schaus and Associates and law firms and CPA firms, and we have our own internal counseling, and we help companies apply for certification, figure out how to market to government, and get you one step closer to winning that work. So I appreciate you listening. Please contact me if you have any follow-up questions, or if anything that I said was confusing. My contact information is at the top of your screen. And thank you, Ray, for navigating.
Thank you, and a great presentation. And thank you again for sharing your time and knowledge on the topic. And thanks especially to our attendees as well. If you have questions, like Anna says, please contact her directly with the information you see right in front of you. Next week, we are covering creating profitable pricing for government contracts. And our entire schedule of webinars can be found on our website under our webinars tab. Thank you, and this concludes the webinar.